The song that was never meant to stop the old stone church had stood for more than a century. Its walls shaped by prayer, grief, joy, and countless quiet confessions whispered into wooden pews. Sunlight filtered gently through stained glass windows, scattering soft colors across the floor like memories that refused to fade. The air carried the scent of polished wood, candle wax, and something deeper reverence. This was not a place for applause or fame. It was a place where titles dissolved and only the human soul remained. That morning, the congregation had gathered for a special service. Word had spread quietly, not through headlines or flashing lights, but through personal invitations and hushed conversations. Many had come simply to pray. Others came because they had heard a familiar voice would be singing, not in a concert hall, not on a grand stage, but here. Before the altar, Dean Martin stood near the front, his posture calm but thoughtful. He was dressed simply, far removed from the glamour that usually followed him. There were no spotlights, no orchestra waiting for cues, no expectation of charm or humor. Only a hymn sheet in his hand and a moment of stillness before song. For most of his life, music had been a profession. Applause had been routine. Praise had followed him everywhere. Yet here, inside these sacred walls, something felt different. This was not performance. This was offering. As the organ began to play, slow and steady, Dean lifted his gaze toward the high ceiling. His voice entered softly, measured, and sincere. It carried warmth, not bravado. The notes did not reach for perfection. They reached for meaning. The congregation listened in silence. Some closed their eyes. Some bowed their heads. A few older parishioners quietly wiped tears from their cheeks. Not because the singing was flawless, but because it felt honest. The song seemed to move not outward, but inward toward something personal and unspoken. Among those seated near the front was a man few recognized at first glance. He was older. His hair touched with silver, his posture upright but humble. His hands rested calmly in his lap, fingers intertwined as if holding back years of discipline and restraint. He was a world-renowned opera singer, a man whose voice had once filled the grandest halls across continents. Critics had called him unmatched. Audiences had called him unforgettable. Yet here, he was simply another listener. For years, his life had revolved around mastery control of breath, pitch, projection. He had trained himself to command silence, to bend it, to shape it into awe. But age had softened him. Fame had lost its shine. What remained was reflection. As Dean continued singing, something stirred inside the opera singer. At first it was subtle, a tension behind the eyes, a tightening in the chest. The melody was familiar, yet different. It was not sung to impress. It was sung to confess. Each phrase carried a quiet vulnerability, struck deeper than any technical brilliance ever could. The opera singer shifted slightly in his seat. He had sung before kings, dignitaries, and packed auditoriums. He had received standing ovations that seemed endless. Yet in that moment, he realized something unsettling. This song was doing what his own voice never could. It was reaching people. Not through power, but through humility. Dean's voice wavered just slightly on one note. Not enough to be a mistake, but enough to reveal humanity. And that small imperfection struck like lightning. The opera singer felt his breath catch. Memories, flooded in years of relentless training. Sacrifices made in pursuit of excellence. Moments where technique mattered more than truth. He remembered times he had silenced his own doubts by singing louder, higher, stronger. Times when perfection became armor, and now, listening to this simple hymn, he felt that armor crack. Dean reached the middle of the song. The church was so quiet that the faint creak of a pew could be heard. The stillness was heavy, almost sacred. No one moved. No one coughed. It felt as though time itself had paused to listen. Then, unexpectedly, a voice broke the silence. "Please, stop." Gasps rippled through the church. Dean froze. Mid-dash phrase, the organ fell silent. Every head turned. The words had not been shouted. They had not been harsh. They were spoken with trembling restraint, as though the speaker himself was unsure whether he should have allowed them to escape. The opera singer had risen from his seat. For a brief moment, confusion spread across the room. Some thought it was disrespect. Others feared confrontation. A few felt discomfort, unsure why a sacred moment had been interrupted. Dean slowly turned toward the man. There was no anger in his expression, only curiosity and concern. The opera singer took a careful step forward. His voice, when he spoke again, was low but steady. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't mean to interrupt out of disrespect." The room held its breath. "I just couldn't let you finish without saying something." Dean remained still, his hymn sheet lowered slightly. He studied the man's face, lined with age, marked by emotion, eyes glistening with something unshed. "Please," Dean said gently. "Say what you need to say." The opera singer swallowed. "For most of my life," he began, "I believe music was about control, precision, power. I believed that if a note was perfect, the soul would follow." He paused, steadying himself. "But listening to you just now, I realized I was wrong." Murmurs stirred among the congregation. "I have sung louder than this, higher than this, more perfectly than this," the man continued. "Yet I have never moved hearts the way you just did, because you weren't trying to prove anything." His voice cracked. "You sang like someone who knows he doesn't need to be admired to be." Heard a deep silence settled over the church. Dean said, "Nothing." The opera singer looked down briefly, then back up. "I spent decades chasing excellence," he said softly. "And in doing so, I forgot why I started singing in the first place." He took a breath. "You reminded me." Tears now flowed freely down his face. "This wasn't a performance," he said. "This was prayer." No one spoke. Dean slowly stepped forward. He did not respond with words at first. Instead, he placed the hymn sheet on the lectern and extended his hand toward the opera singer, not as a celebrity, not as a star, but as one human to another. The man hesitated only a moment before taking it, their hands clasped in the center aisle. "I didn't come here to sing," Dean said quietly. "I came here to listen." The opera singer nodded, overwhelmed. The congregation watched, many now in tears themselves. They were witnessing something rare, two men shaped by fame, stripped of ego, meeting at the level of the soul. After a moment, Dean turned back toward the altar. "May I finish the song?" he asked, not as a performer, but as a question offered to the room. The opera singer nodded. "Please," he whispered. "Finish it." Dean returned to his place. The organ resumed, softer than before. When Dean began singing again, his voice carried something new, not just sincerity, but shared understanding. The words seemed heavier now, richer, filled with meaning drawn from the interruption itself. The opera singer closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about technique or range, or breath control. He was simply listening, and in that listening, something long broken inside him began to heal. The service did not end when the final note faded. In fact, for many inside the church that day, it felt as though something had only just begun. People remained seated long after the organ fell quiet. No one rushed toward the doors. No one checked a watch. The stillness that filled the room was not awkward, it was heavy with meaning. Like the pause after a confession that cannot be taken back. Dean Martin stood near the altar, his hands loosely clasped, his eyes lowered. The familiar ease he carried on stage was absent. In its place was something far more vulnerable. The opera singer had returned to his seat, but he no longer felt like the same man who had stood up moments earlier. His heart was pounding not with fear, but with release. For years, he had carried a weight he could never name. Now somehow, it had been spoken aloud without words. As the congregation slowly began to disperse, several people approached Dean quietly. They thanked him, some with trembling voices, others with nothing more than a nod and tearful eyes. Dean listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was softly, almost cautiously, as though he were afraid to disturb whatever fragile truth had. It just surfaced. The opera singer watched from a distance. He had been recognized now. A few whispered his name. A younger man stared at him in disbelief. But none of that mattered. Fame felt strangely distant, like an echo from another life. He considered leaving unnoticed, yet something held him back. As Dean finished speaking with the last parishioner, he turned. Their eyes met again. There was an understanding there. Unspoken but clear, they found themselves sitting together in one of the side pews, the church nearly empty now. Sunlight had shifted, casting longer shadows across the floor. The quiet was different, less sacred, more personal. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the opera singer broke the silence. "I haven't sung in public for 3 years," he said. Dean looked at him, surprised. "By choice?" The man nodded slowly. "At first I told myself it was rest. Then I said it was dignity. But the truth is, I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Dean asked gently. The opera singer stared straight ahead. "That if I sang again, and the voice failed me, even slightly, I would discover that music had taken everything from me and left nothing behind." Dean said nothing. He had learned over time that some truths needed space more than response. "I built my life on being flawless," the man continued. "Audiences praised me because I never broke. I never cracked. But when you cracked just for a moment, it did more than all my perfect performances ever did." He turned to Dean, his eyes intense. "That terrified me." Dean exhaled slowly. "It shouldn't. But it does," the man said. "Because if imperfection is what reaches people, then what was I protecting all those years?" The question lingered between them like a challenge. Dean leaned back against the pew. "Maybe," he said carefully, "you were protecting yourself. And maybe that was necessary for a time." The opera singer frowned. "And now?" "And now," Dean replied, "maybe it's costing you more than it saves." The words landed hard. Outside, church bells rang faintly in the distance, signaling the passing of the hour. Time was moving again. The moment would soon slip away if left untouched. "I want to ask you something," the opera singer said. Dean nodded. "Would you sing with me?" Dean blinked. "Here?" "Not now," the man clarified quickly. "Not today. But someday. Somewhere small. Somewhere that doesn't care who we are." Dean studied him, searching for ego, for ambition. For publicity, there was none. Only fear and hope. "I don't know if I can sing like you," Dean said honestly. The opera singer smiled faintly. "Neither can I anymore." That smile carried a sadness deeper than any loss of fame. They parted soon after. Only a crisis, only a quiet understanding. Dean left the church and stepped into the afternoon light, unaware that something unseen had already begun to shift. That night, the opera singer sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by reminders of a life once filled with applause-framed posters, awards, photographs frozen in triumph. He stood before them now, feeling none of the pride they once inspired. His gaze settled on an old piano in the corner, its surface layered with dust. He lifted the cover. The keys were slightly yellowed, worn by years of use and neglect. He pressed one gently. The note sounded weak. He recoiled as if burned. For hours, sat there, wrestling with the truth he had avoided for years. His voice had defined him, but it had also imprisoned him. And now, without it, did not know who he was. He remembered Dean's words. "Maybe it's costing you more than it saves." With shaking hands, he stood and began vocal exercises he had not dared attempt in years. The sound that emerged was uneven, rough, incomplete, and unbearable. He stopped. Silence returned. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. It started quietly, almost involuntarily, then grew until tears streamed down his face. Not tears of grief, but relief. For the first time in decades, he was not trying to impress anyone. Across the city, Dean Martin sat at his own piano, staring at the keys without playing. He felt unsettled. The encounter had stirred something he thought he had already resolved. He had always known fame was fragile, but he had never fully understood how dangerous perfection could be until he saw what it had done to another man. He played a chord, soft and imperfect, and smiled. Neither of them knew it yet, but their paths were no longer separate. Something had been set in motion, something that would force both men to confront their pasts, their fears, and the true meaning of their voices. The most difficult part was still ahead, because the next time they would meet, one of them would face a choice that could either restore his soul, silence him forever. The invitation arrived without ceremony. No press release. No announcement. No expectations attached. It was handwritten, folded once, sealed carefully as if whoever sent it feared that even the slightest force might tear it apart. The envelope sat unopened on the opera singer's desk for hours. Its presence heavier than its weight. He already knew what it was. Inside was an invitation to a small, benefit gathering held not in a concert hall, but in a modest community auditorium attached to a hospital foundation. The event was meant to raise funds quietly. No grand stage. No orchestra pit. Just voices, stories, and shared humanity, and one name stood out. Dean. Martin, the opera singer's hands trembled as he finally opened the letter. There it was. Written plainly, "If you're willing, I'd be honored to share a song with you. No expectations. No promises. No mention of legacy, just an invitation." For days, the opera singer avoided answering. Each morning, he told himself he would respond by nightfall. Each night, he convinced himself it was better to remain silent. Fear had become familiar, almost comfortable. It protected him from disappointment, from exposure, from the possibility that the voice he once trusted might betray him in front of others. But something had changed since the church. Silence no longer felt safe. The night before the event, he stood alone on a darkened stage during rehearsal hours. The auditorium was empty, seats stretching outward, like watchful eyes. A single microphone stood at center stage. He stepped toward it, his breath caught. This was different from the grand
opera houses of his past.
There were no curtains to hide behind, no distance between him and the audience. If he sang here, he would be seen not as a legend, but as a man. He whispered a single note. It wavered. He pulled back, heart racing. Then he remembered the church, the crack in Dean's voice, the stillness that followed, the way imperfection had drawn people closer, not pushed them away. He stepped forward again and sang. The sound was not powerful. It was not polished, but it was real. The night of the event arrived quietly. The audience was small patients, families, volunteers, doctors, people who had known pain in ways applause could never touch. There were no cameras, no reporters, just expectation and curiosity. Dean arrived early, dressed simply. He paced behind the stage, not nervous, but thoughtful. He understood the risk he had asked another man to take. When the opera singer arrived, Dean noticed it immediately, the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he walked. As if each step required permission, they greeted one another with a nod, no rehearsed words. No encouragement spoken aloud. Some things were too fragile for speech. As the lights dimmed, Dean walked onto the stage first. He spoke briefly not about music, not about himself, but about gratitude, about moments that change people without warning. Then he gestured toward the side of the stage. The opera singer hesitated. The audience applauded politely. Unaware of the battle unfolding inside him, he stepped into the light in that instant. Memories crashed over him, cheers from decades ago. Critics' praise, the pressure to never fail. His throat tightened. His chest felt heavy. He almost turned back. Dean caught his eye and nodded. The music began softly, just a piano. No orchestration, no protection. They sang together at first. The opera singer held back. His voice hovered beneath Dean's, cautious, restrained. He was measuring himself, testing the ground. The audience leaned forward, sensing something fragile was unfolding. Then Dean did something unexpected. He stepped back. He let the opera singer lead. The man froze for a fraction of a second, then instinct took over. His voice rose, not with force, but with emotion. It cracked slightly on a sustained note. No one flinched. No one looked away instead. The room grew still. That single imperfection carried more truth than perfection ever could. The opera singer felt the audience with him, not judging, not waiting for greatness, but receiving honesty. His fear loosened its grip. He stopped trying to sound like who he used to be. He sang like who he was. By the final note, there were tears throughout the room. The applause that followed was not thunderous. It was steady, respectful, earned. Backstage, the opera singer sat down hard, his legs weak. Dean joined him. "You did it," Dean said. The man shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "I survived it." Dean smiled. "That's how it starts." But the night was not over. As the audience filtered out, a young boy approached them. He was thin, pale, wearing a hospital bracelet. He held a folded piece of paper. "My mom says I might not get better," the boy said plainly. "But when you sang, it felt like I might." The opera singer felt his chest tighten painfully. The boy handed him the paper drawing of two figures on a stage, holding music between them. That was the moment. The moment the opera singer understood what his voice was truly for. Not applause. Not legacy. Not perfection, connection. Later that night, alone again, he realized something terrifying. If his voice now belonged to others, he could no longer hide it. And soon, the world would hear him again whether he was ready or not, because word of that night would not stay. Contained, and the next invitation would not be small. It would force him to decide whether he was willing to risk everything one final time. The invitation that followed was impossible to ignore. This time, it did not arrive handwritten. It arrived through quiet, persistent phone calls that went unanswered, messages that were never urgent yet never stopped. The request was simple, but the weight behind it was immense. A national memorial service, not a concert, not a tribute. A gathering meant to honor lives interrupted too soon. They wanted music not to impress, not to entertain, but to carry grief where words could not. Dean Martin accepted immediately. The opera singer did not. For nights he slept poorly. When he did sleep, he dreamed of stages collapsing beneath his feet, of voices leaving him mid-note, of silence roaring louder than any crowd. The memory of the hospital auditorium still lingered, but so did the fear that it had been a rare moment, not a new beginning. This time, the audience would be vast. The expectation unspoken but heavy. If he failed here, he would fail publicly. Dean visited him one afternoon, unannounced. They sat together, without music, without plans. Just two men, older now, aware that time did not wait for certainty. "You don't have to do this," Dean said quietly. The opera singer stared out the window. "That's the problem," he replied. "I know." The day of the memorial arrived under a gray sky. The venue was large, solemn, filled with people carrying loss in visible and invisible ways. Some wore black. Others wore expressions of exhaustion that no clothing could hide. Backstage, the opera singer stood motionless, staring at his reflection. He no longer recognized the man looking back, not because age had changed him, but because fear no longer fully controlled him, that frightened him more than failure ever had. Dean stood beside him. "No matter what happens," Dean said, "you already told the truth once. You can't take that back." The opera singer closed his eyes when they walked onto the stage. The room fell silent, not from anticipation, but from respect. This was not an audience waiting to be impressed. It was a room full of people needing something real. The first notes began. Dean sang first, steady, grounded, human. His voice carried warmth, not command. When the opera singer joined, there was hesitation, but it passed quickly. He did not reach for old power. He did not force projection. He sang as he was now. Halfway through the piece, something unexpected happened. The opera singer's voice faltered. Just briefly, a catch in the throat. A note, unfinished. A decade earlier, that moment would have destroyed him. Now, he did not stop. He breathed. He continued. The sound that followed was quieter, but deeper. The imperfection cracked open something in the room. People wept openly. Some reached for strangers' hands. Others bowed their heads. No one turned away. When the final note faded, there was no applause. There was something greater. Silence, thick, reverent, complete. The opera singer felt tears fall freely. Not from shame. From release. He had not been flawless. He had been present. Later, as they stood alone again, Dean placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't lose your voice," Dean said. The opera singer shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "I finally stopped hiding it." In the weeks that followed, he declined offers for grand returns, televised performances, and interviews. Instead, he sang quietly at hospitals, small gatherings. Places where music mattered more than reputation. His voice was never what it once had been. It was something better. Dean returned to his life unchanged on the surface, yet profoundly altered within. He no longer feared silence between notes. He welcomed it because he had learned something rare, that the strongest voices are not the loudest, that perfection impresses but honesty transforms, and that sometimes the song that stops everything is the one that finally begins.